We're calling all writers, storytellers, and creators of tales of the paranormal and supernatural. Do you have a spine-tingling story that's too chilling to keep to yourself? If the answer is yes, then wherever you are in the world, the Haunted UK Fiction Podcast wants to hear from you. Whether you're a published author, an aspiring writer, or someone with a natural gift for storytelling, this is your chance to share your work with a global audience of listeners who crave the eerie, the unexplained, the otherworldly. We're looking for original fictional short stories or novellas with strong paranormal or supernatural themes. Your stories can be suspenseful, mysterious, atmospheric, terrifying, thought-provoking, even darkly magical. If your story is selected, we'll professionally narrate, record, mix, and master it into an audiobook-style format, then feature it on the show. You'll get a copy of the finished production to use however you like, and you'll retain full ownership of your work. There are no fees, no contracts, and no hidden jargon. Your story deserves to be heard, whether it's a tale that's been haunting your notebook for years, or maybe something that you're finally ready to unleash. This is your chance to bring it to life. To submit your story for consideration, email us at hauntedukfiction@hotmail.com. And don't forget to follow the show on Instagram at hauntedukfiction. Now sit back and enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome, dear listeners, to Haunted UK Fiction, a sister podcast to The Haunted UK, which features original flash fiction, short stories and novellas with paranormal themes. All stories you will hear were written by a collection of talented writers, authors and storytellers, both independent and professional. In today's episode, we'll be reading New House, Old Demons, which was sent in to us by Craig Forster. Get comfortable, grab a little something to sip on, perhaps cuddle up under a blanket to help offset the chills coming your way. And let's dive into the story. It was September 1978, a particularly warm summer in Madison, Georgia, USA, a quaint town that had seen better days. George worked tirelessly on his latest project, his calloused hands wielding tools with precision, constructing a new house where a long-forgotten burial ground had once stood. The lot, surrounded by tall oaks, had been abandoned for centuries, the whispers of the past buried beneath layers of dirt and neglect. The air around George had the scent of sawdust and the occasional whiff of something faintly unpleasant that he couldn't quite place. As the house began to take shape, George noticed peculiar occurrences that grew increasingly unsettling. Tools would vanish from their designated spots, only to reappear in random locations days later. His coffee thermos, a constant companion, would end up in the fridge, cold and untouched. At first, he brushed the incidents off as being caused by his own forgetfulness, but they grew more frequent and deliberate. One moonlit night, George found himself unable to sleep, haunted by a cacophony of distant voices shouting and the relentless pounding of invisible feet. The whispers grew louder, morphing into a symphony of anguished cries that seemed to echo from the very walls of the unfinished abode. The sound of running water grew from a gentle trickle to a furious crescendo, though not a single tap was open. The lights in the house began to flicker erratically, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls like macabre puppets. The following evening, George's family, comprised of his wife Linda and their young twin children, Mark and Jenny, moved in. They were eager to start anew in a place they could call their own. Linda's eyes lit up as she unpacked her kitchenware, while Mark and Jenny raced through the hallways like any 9-year-old children would do, their laughter piercing the silence. Their joy, however, would be short-lived. As the days passed, they began to feel the presence of unseen entities, their curiosity soon turning into fear. They started to see ghostly figures flitting at the periphery of their vision, always just out of reach. The sight of an open cupboard door was no longer a minor annoyance, but instead a chilling reminder that they were not alone. One evening, Linda stumbled upon an old ouija board in the dusty loft. As George had built this house, she was unsure how the board had gotten there, but it seemed to be calling out to her. Intrigued by the mysterious object, she brought it downstairs. The board resembled a relic from the 1800s, its wooden surface etched with faded letters, and a planchette that gleamed under the light. She showed it to George, who, feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension, suggested they try it out. Their curiosity got the better of them, and with trembling hands, they placed their fingers on the planchette. They whispered questions into the stillness, hoping to connect with the spirits that lurked within the house's walls. At first, the planchette barely moved, tracing a lazy no to their timid inquiries. But as the night grew darker, the whispers grew louder. The planchette began to slide with purpose, the letters forming words that sent chills down their spine. It spelled out a name, Martha, and a date, 1863. The children shared a nervous glance, their hearts racing. They had stumbled upon something ancient and possibly malevolent. The room grew cold, and the planchette shot to the corner of the board, coming to a sudden halt after spelling the word, run. Panic set in, and the family bolted from the room, the board clattering to the floor behind them. The next day, the house was eerily calm. Too calm. The silence was so profound that it was almost tangible, pressing down on their ears like a heavy blanket. That evening, as George sat in his chair reading a newspaper, something about the ouija board in the corner of the room caught his eye. The game board was ablaze, the flames quickly growing until they were licking the ceiling, yet the rest of the room remained untouched. The only sounds were that of the crackling of the ancient wood and a faint demonic laugh. George stumbled back in shock, his eyes wide with terror as the demonic laugh grew louder. The fire spread with an unnatural speed, engulfing the board until it was nothing but ash, leaving the remainder of the room and the belongings in it untouched. The laughter didn't cease, but instead grew stronger, spreading until it was resonating through every corner of the house. Linda, her face pale and eyes wide, stood at the top of the stairs. The children clung to her, their small bodies trembling. She had heard the whispers too, had seen the shadows grow darker and more substantial, and now the demonic laughter was wrapping itself around them like a chokehold. The joy of their new home had turned into a prison of fear. She watched as George approached, the air thick with the scent of burnt oak. The expression on George's face was one of horror she had never seen before. He told them about the fire, his voice quivering, and Linda realized that their lives had changed irrevocably. That night, the whispers grew into a cacophony of demonic chuckles and taunts, and something in George shifted. His once soothing voice now echoed through the halls, deep and guttural, commanding them to
"Get away! He is mine!"
The words seemed to resonate from deep within his body, as though something else was speaking through him. His eyes, usually filled with warmth, had turned into pools of darkness. His gestures, once reassuring, were now jerky and menacing. Linda and the children huddled together, their hearts racing like wild horses. With trembling hands, Linda picked up the phone and dialed the number for the local church. The line was silent for what felt like an eternity before a calm voice answered. Linda spoke in hushed tones, explaining the horrors they had unleashed with the ouija board. The priest on the other end listened intently, his voice steady and kind. He told her they needed to vacate the house immediately and wait for a priest to arrive and perform an exorcism. Father Daniel arrived the next morning, his eyes reflecting a solemn resolve. He stepped into the house, a silver crucifix clutched in his hand, and was met by George, whose transformation was complete. The man who had once been a loving husband and father now snarled, his teeth bared like an animal, his eyes blackened like bottomless pits, fixated on the priest with a twisted grin.
"You cannot save him,"
the demonic voice echoed from George's lips.
"He is with us now."
The priest wasted no time. He began to chant prayers in Latin, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. The house groaned under the weight of the ancient incantations. The walls seemed to pulse with each syllable. The children and Linda watched from the corner, their fear a palpable presence that thickened the air. Mark, with tears streaming down his face, clutched Jenny's hand tightly, his knuckles white as they both stared in disbelief at their father's now monstrous form. As Father Daniel continued, the house grew colder, the warmth of their breath misting the air. The candles on the table flickered erratically, casting demonic shadows that danced across George's contorted features. Yet, there was a hint of something else, something otherworldly and powerful, fighting to regain control. With each prayer, the darkness in George's eyes wavered, and for brief moments, Linda could see the flicker of her husband's soul trapped within. The priest's voice grew louder, the words of the exorcism rite a sonic weapon against the malevolent force. The children watched, their hearts pounding in their chests as their father's body convulsed and arched in an unnatural display of strength. The demon within George roared, a sound that seemed to shake the very foundation of the house. As it resisted the holy incantations, the priest's grip on the crucifix tightened, his knuckles white with the effort of holding back the beast. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the room stilled. The flurry of activity ceased, leaving only the quiet hum of anticipation in its wake. George's body slumped, the blackness in his eyes retreating to reveal the familiar warmth of his soul. His eyes searched the room, finding Linda and the children huddled in the corner. He looked at them with confusion and fear, his expression one of a man who had just woken from a terrible nightmare. Father Daniel, his face etched with lines of exhaustion, stepped closer to the family. "The spirit has been cast out," he solemnly informed them. "But the house remains tainted. You must leave this place. It is not safe for any of you to stay." The children nodded in silent understanding. Their wide eyes filled with the weight of what they had just experienced. With haste, they packed their most essential belongings into a small U-Haul. The house's windows watched them like cold and blinking eyes. The air was thick with an unspoken finality as they closed the door behind them, the echo of their footsteps trailing off into the distance. The house stood tall and foreboding behind them, its newness now marred by the dark secrets it had revealed. The sun was setting, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the lawn. as if the very ground was trying to claw them back. 3 months later, the house had a new family, the Carters. Henry, Claire, and their daughters Rachel and Emily were blissfully unaware of the horrors that had unfolded within the house's walls. The real estate agent had painted the incident as an isolated case of vandals, or a prank gone too far. The home's price was significantly lower than surrounding properties, which made the deal too tempting to resist. Henry and Claire, filled with hope for a fresh start, signed the paperwork, without a second thought. Claire, a gentle soul with a penchant for antiques, found the old ouija board while unpacking. She'd heard tales of its history, but dismissed them as folklore. Her curiosity piqued, she convinced her husband Henry to join her for a night of harmless fun. Their teenage daughters, Rachel and Emily, rolled their eyes, but secretly couldn't resist the allure of the forbidden. The board remained silent for what felt like an eternity, the room suffocating with anticipation. Then, without warning, the planchette began to slide, spelling out, "Welcome back, Martha." Rachel's hand shot up, breaking the contact. "It's just a board," Henry chuckled, his voice strained. A series of chuckles echoed in the corner of the room, growing louder and morphing into the same demonic laughter that had haunted the house before. The room grew colder, and the once still air thickened with malevolence. The next day, Henry and Claire awoke to the sound of breaking glass and furniture being thrown. Rachel and Emily, terrified, called out for their parents, but their voices were lost in the cacophony of chaos. The house had come alive with rage, and upon coming downstairs, it was as though an invisible tornado had swept through the living room. The family huddled together, their eyes wide with terror as the poltergeist grew bolder. The whispers grew louder. The shadows grew darker, coalescing into a swirling mass of malevolent intent. That night, many miles away, George and Linda couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. They both had the same dream, a vivid nightmare of the house they had left behind, filled with the anguished cries of a trapped soul, named Martha. The walls of their new safe haven seemed to close in around them, suffocating them with a sense of dread. The laughter from the dream echoed in their minds, a cruel reminder of the horrors they had hoped to escape. The following day, driven by an inexplicable sense of responsibility, George decided that they had to go back to the old house to warn the new occupants of its dark past and the demonic presence that lurked within. Linda was hesitant, fearing that their involvement might invite more trouble, but she knew George was right. They simply couldn't leave another family to face the same fate that they had barely escaped. As they approached the house, a thick plume of smoke billowed into the sky, painting an eerie shade of grey. Their hearts sank as they saw the once beautiful structure, engulfed in a ravenous fire, the flames licking the night sky like a monstrous beast seeking escape. The distant wail of sirens grew louder as they neared, a discordant symphony to the crackling inferno. The heat was palpable, even from the safety of their car, the windows rolled up tight. Claire stumbled out of the house, her face streaked with soot and eyes wide with terror. Rachel and Emily followed closely behind, their clothes singed, their faces etched with horror. Henry, his arm wrapped protectively around his family, met George and Linda's gaze. His eyes were filled with a desperation that George knew all too well. They had tried to ignore the whispers and the strange occurrences, hoping they were mere figments of their imagination, but now, as the house burned before them, the reality was as stark as the flaming embers that danced in the wind. The fire department arrived, their faces grim as they worked tirelessly to extinguish the blaze. The firemen's shouts and the roar of the fire trucks were a stark contrast to the unnerving silence that would occasionally fill the house. As the fire dwindled, the demonic laughter, still echoing in George's head, grew fainter, and he felt a strange sense of relief. George knew that the demon had been bound to the house, and without its vessel, it had no power over them. The horror was confined to the crumbling remains of the structure that had once been their prison. Henry and Claire, their eyes haunted, recounted the events of the past few days to George and Linda. The house had come alive with a vicious and malicious presence, the whispers escalating into a full-blown assault on their sanity. Rachel and Emily spoke in hushed tones about the cold spots that had plagued them and the strange occurrences that had left them sleepless with fear. The family's desperation was palpable, their voices trembling as they described the malevolent force that had so swiftly taken over their lives. George and Linda listened with heavy hearts, the memories of their own ordeal flooding back. They knew the Carters had to leave. With newfound resolve, they decided to help Henry and Claire move to a new city, far from the cursed ground that had brought them so much pain. Working tirelessly to escape the lingering clutches of the house's demonic force, Henry and Claire, still in shock, moved like automatons, their faces a canvas of fear and disbelief as they loaded what little belongings they were able to salvage into their vehicle. Months later, in the quiet sanctuary of their new home, Rachel and Emily finally began to let their guard down, leaving the whispers and shadows behind. Yet one night, Rachel woke to a faint, unmistakable sound coming from the attic. She woke Emily, who confirmed she could also hear it. Cautiously, they tiptoed up the creaking stairs, their hearts thudding against their rib cages. There, amidst the boxes they had yet to unpack, they found it. The ouija board, untouched by the fire, gleaming in the moonlight that stretched through the dusty window. Emily's hand trembled as she reached out to touch it, the coldness of the wood sending a shiver down her spine. The laughter returned, echoing through her mind, a taunting lullaby that grew louder with every passing second. The board's planchette began to move on its own, the letters spelling out a single word, a familiar name. Martha. Rachel's eyes grew wide with terror as she realized the nightmare had returned to them, more persistent and more powerful than ever before. The demonic whispers grew to a deafening scream, the words,
"You will never escape,"
resonating through the house. The walls seemed to pulse with anger, the floorboards groaning under the weight of the unseen force. Rachel and Emily, frozen in disbelief, stared on, their eyes wide with shock as the ouija board levitated into the air, the planchette spinning like a mad compass, pointing to each of them in turn. Henry and Claire heard the commotion and ran to see what was happening. As soon as they got into the attic, the planchette flew from the board and hurtled towards Henry. It struck him with the force of a thrown rock, smashing into his chest with a sickening crack. He stumbled back, his breath leaving his body in a pained gasp. The planchette, now embedded in his flesh, sizzled and smoked, burning through fabric and skin with an unnatural heat. Henry's eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed to the ground, his body convulsing in agony. Claire, her fear now overridden by an instinct to protect, lunged at Henry, pulling at the planchette with all her might. It was as if the house itself was fighting her, resisting her every tug. But she persisted, her nails digging into the wood, her teeth gritted with determination. With a final desperate yank, the planchette came free, leaving a smouldering wound in Henry's chest. He lay there, his body limp and lifeless, his breath shallow and ragged. The room grew still, the demonic laughter dying away like the last embers of a dying fire. Rachel and Emily stared at their mother in shock, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on their young minds. Claire cradled Henry's head in her lap, her eyes brimming with tears. "Call an ambulance," she whispered to Rachel, her voice barely audible. Rachel nodded, her hands shaking as she dialed the emergency number, her voice cracking as she spoke. Henry's eyes fluttered open, his gaze wild and unfocused on Claire. "You're Martha," he croaked, his voice raw from the ordeal. Rachel and Emily exchanged horrified glances, their hearts racing as they realized the demon had not been fully banished. The air grew thick with tension. The very walls seemed to close in on them. Rachel took a tentative step back, her hand reaching for her sister's, but Emily remained rooted to the spot, her eyes glued to the scene before her. Claire's features twisted into a grotesque smile, her eyes blackening like twin pools of tar. The laughter that erupted from her mouth was unlike anything they had ever heard, deep, guttural, and filled with the pain of centuries.
Yes,
she boomed, the sound reverberating through the room with the power of 1,000 voices.
I am Martha. I am the mother who had to make the ultimate sacrifice, and now I shall never leave this place.
Rachel felt a chill run down her spine, the reality of their situation setting in with the force of a glacial river. The wail of sirens grew closer, piercing the silence like a knife through the quiet air. The red and blue lights danced across the walls of the room, casting a macabre pattern that only heightened their fear. The front door burst open, and a flood of emergency personnel rushed in. The demonic presence in Claire grew stronger, resisting the touch of the medics as they tried to assess Henry's condition. It was a battle of wills, the demon refusing to relinquish its new host. Tears streamed down Rachel's and Emily's cheeks as they watched the chaos unfold. They knew their mother was in there still, fighting for control. Rachel took a deep breath and stepped forward, her hand trembling as she reached out to Claire. "Mom," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the cacophony. "We're here. We all need you." The room grew eerily quiet, the sirens outside fading into the background. Claire's eyes snapped into focus, and a look of pure terror washed over her face. Her body arched, and she let out a scream so powerful it seemed to shatter the very air around them. The sound pierced Rachel's eardrums, and she felt her knees buckle under the weight of the anguish it carried.
Rachel, Emily.
Claire's voice was a mix of her own desperation and the demon's malevolent growl. The twisted grin that replaced her mother's gentle smile stretched wider, revealing teeth stained black. Rachel and Emily clutched each other, their eyes wide with horror, as they watched Claire's soul wage a brutal battle for control.
You will never leave me.
The demon snarled through Claire's lips.
You're mine. All of you.
Suddenly, Henry's hand reached up and cupped Claire's cheek, his eyes pleading. "Claire, it's me," he whispered, his voice strained but filled with love. "Our children need you. I need you. Please, come back to us." For a brief moment, Claire's eyes cleared, and she stared at Henry with a look of utter confusion. "What's happening?" she whispered, her voice small and trembling. The room grew still as if the demon was retreating, the air in the room thick with the scent of burnt oak and fear. The emergency responders froze, unsure of what to make of the sudden shift in the atmosphere. Rachel and Emily held their breath, their hearts hammering in their chests. Rachel's eyes searched Henry's, the blackness slowly receding like a tide retreating from a moonlit shore. The warmth and love that had once filled her eyes returned, and she seemed to see him again, truly see him, as the man she loved. The demon's grip loosened, and Claire collapsed into Henry's arms, her body shaking with sobs, their tears mingling as they clung to each other, their fear slowly morphing into relief. The demon had taken a toll on Henry, but his strength returned with each passing day. The wound from the planchette had healed, leaving behind a scar that served as a grim reminder of the battle they had won. Claire, too, made a full recovery, the demonic influence seemingly banished from her soul. Together, they rebuilt their lives in a new town, leaving yet another haunted house behind like a distant, terrible dream. Henry and Claire moved next door to George and Linda, and the families became close friends, their nightmares fading like the last embers of the fire that had ravaged their former home. Rachel and Emily grew close to Mark and Jenny, their bond forged in the crucible of fear and the supernatural. They had learned to keep their experiences to themselves, sharing the memories only with each other. In a new town, the families came to know their new neighbours, who were kind and welcoming, unaware of the past horrors that still haunted them. They attended church regularly, seeking solace and strength in the community's warm embrace, and the local priest became a trusted confidant, offering guidance and badly needed reassurance that the demon had truly been exorcised. Because sometimes, in the quiet dead of night, the faint echo of a demonic laugh still echoed in their memories. That brings us to the end of this episode. We truly hope you enjoyed this tale of lingering evil entities and attachments. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to follow Haunted UK Fiction on your favourite podcast platform, as we have many more amazing, chilling stories coming your way. If you have an original story that would send a chill down our spines and you would like to submit it for review, simply send it to hauntedukfiction@hotmail.com. That's hauntedukfiction@hotmail.com. Until next time, stay safe and take care.